On Sunday, July 14th, 1985, the Reno Gazette set its sights on exposing the most powerful criminal syndicate known to man, the Chicago outfit. Nevada, glittering under neon lights and fueled by gambling and greed, had long been fertile ground for mobsters. The outfit's tentacles had spread deep into the heart of Las Vegas, gripping casinos and controlling vast sums of money, wielding influence that permeated every corner of state power. For months, investigative reporter Ken Levine had pieced together whispers, hidden truths, and secret testimonies, sifting meticulously through thousands of records and shadowy informants to uncover the grim reality. Organized crime wasn't just alive in Nevada. It thrived, burrowing deeper with each passing year. The underworld was no abstraction. It was an empire built on fear, loyalty, and ruthless efficiency, a web spanning at least 18 crime families. Powerful figures lurked in the shadows, figures who did not hesitate to strong-arm casino executives, politicians, and even law enforcement. Their conspiracy was simple, but deadly effective. Break the law, siphon millions, and silence anyone foolish enough to stand in their way. Nevada, despite its endless wealth and allure, found itself at a crossroads. Bold, new measures were not merely suggested, they were essential. If the state hoped to reclaim its integrity, it would have to fight harder, smarter, and more aggressively than ever before. The stakes could not be higher, and the threat was undeniably real. This is the story of Nevada's war against organized crime, a war still raging today. Over the coming weeks, we'll uncover the hidden history of how the mob infiltrated the Silver State, how it evolved, and why its grasp remains frighteningly strong. The accounts that follow are drawn from reliable news sources and courageous insiders, some of whom spoke at considerable risk and thus remain unnamed. Nevada faces a moment of truth. Confront the mob or risk being forever plundered. The time for action has arrived. Here is that story. Money. It was Nevada's heartbeat, the golden nectar that pulsed through the veins of its glitzy casinos and smoky poker rooms. Every chip placed on the felt, every dice thrown across velvet tables, every slot machine chiming jackpot, fed the insatiable greed of organized crime. It was a greed that it went unchecked, hidden beneath the glamorous facade of Las Vegas neon and Reno glitter. For more than 4 decades, the Mafia, known by many names, the outfit, La Cosa Nostra, the syndicate, had perfected the art of corruption, embedding itself deeply into the fabric of Nevada's political and financial structure. This was no ragtag group of street-level hoods. This was a brutally organized network of at least 18 crime families, each with their hands deep in the pockets of the state's largest casinos, bleeding them dry of profits that should have enriched communities rather than criminals. The underworld paid no taxes. That burden fell on the everyday citizens of Nevada. While politicians lamented budget shortfalls, the Mafia funneled millions of untaxed dollars into their own pockets, money that could have transformed the state. Schools could have flourished, property taxes could have plummeted, and the future could have been one of abundance rather than austerity. But the mob's reach extended beyond mere money. No Nevadan was immune. Your cherished possessions, like the heirloom sapphire brooch from your great-grandmother, could vanish overnight, reappearing days later as part of the criminal economy, sold by fences to enrich crime bosses in Buffalo or Chicago. The sleek new computer your family treasured could vanish, its value converted into dirty cash-funding mob activities halfway across the country. The mob was omnipresent, ruthless, and brutally efficient. Even legitimate casino operations were not immune. Mobsters would identify targets, silently infiltrating the gaming tables, counting rooms, and accounting departments. When subtlety failed, violence spoke volumes. Bones were broken, homes invaded, and lives shattered in the relentless pursuit of wealth. The truth was simple. The Mafia didn't care about Nevada's future or its prosperity. Its only loyalty was to money. Yet the true scandal lay within Nevada's own halls of power. Politicians and gaming regulators, caught in a web of political donations and favors, turned a blind eye, ensuring the mob's steady hand on the reins. Governor Richard Bryan himself acknowledged the industry's immense political clout, his understated words ringing ominously clear. The gaming industry does carry a lot of weight. Bryan's modest proposal in the 1985 legislative session to raise $7,200,000 in casino fees for gaming control was swiftly crushed under the iron heel of the industry. Instead, these funds were drawn from the pockets of ordinary taxpayers, perpetuating the vicious cycle of corruption and complicity. Behind closed doors, lobbyists and crime bosses exerted relentless pressure, preventing any meaningful crackdown. Regulatory weaknesses persisted, leaving questionable casino operators, frontmen for powerful mob families, firmly entrenched in the state's lucrative gaming industry. While Nevadans bore the cost, the Mafia reaped the rewards, untouched by accountability or remorse. For years, the mob carefully nurtured their public image, polished and clean-cut on the surface, yet deadly beneath. Casino skimming had been their specialty, quietly funneling millions out of Nevada casinos without ever drawing unwanted attention. Murder and dirty business were handled discreetly, always outside Nevada's borders, to maintain the illusion of peace and prosperity in Sin City. Yet, slowly but surely, the federal government was tightening its grip. Investigations and increased scrutiny were squeezing the mob out of casino skimming, forcing gangsters to adapt. Robberies, burglaries, and brutal shakedowns were becoming commonplace. Violence had returned to Nevada's doorstep, shattering the illusion of civility that the outfit had so carefully maintained for decades. Federal authorities were learning the nuances, the subtle language of the mob, understanding not just its brutality, but its psychology, motivations, and hidden alliances. But progress was slow. The battle was far from won. The shadow of organized crime still loomed over Nevada, darkening its future. And this was only the beginning of a long, brutal exposure. A journey into Nevada's tangled and terrifying relationship with the Mafia. More shocking revelations were yet to come. While the mob had always flirted with northern Nevada, their real passion wasn't ownership, it was exploitation. Reno and Lake Tahoe casinos became fertile hunting grounds, prime targets for a carousel of scams and hustles, fraud, cheating at tables, elaborate credit schemes, the classic outside jobs that defined mob ingenuity. The syndicates didn't desire control here. Instead, they mastered the shadows, feeding off the glittering casinos as parasites rather than proprietors. It was all cold calculation, pure economics hidden beneath the dark cloak of crime. Reno and Lake Tahoe offered opportunities for deception, credit scams meticulously designed, elaborate cheating schemes conjured by skilled hands. But these were quick hits, a stark contrast to the entrenched power the mob wielded elsewhere. The casino doors in northern Nevada were rarely theirs to guard, merely targets ripe for plunder. Yet, as alluring as these quick cons seemed, times had changed. Nevada wasn't the easy mark it had once been. The Wild West days, when a wise guy from Cleveland could stroll into town and skim millions without so much as a raised eyebrow, were fading fast. The state had grown wiser, tougher, its casinos harder targets. But still, the mob persisted. To them, Nevada was the underworld's chicken McNuggets. Losing it wouldn't kill the operation, but keeping it around made life just a little sweeter. This wasn't an isolated sickness. Like a malignant tumor quietly spreading beneath the surface, organized crime had infected every corner of America. Nevada was merely the latest state to discover how deeply this cancer had taken root, silently corroding the social fabric, threatening to upend communities and stain their very way of life. Across the nation, a historic reckoning was underway. Ambitious prosecutors, young and hungry, were hauling mafia bosses into courtrooms at an unprecedented pace. It was as though a veil had lifted, and America was seeing clearly, for the first time, the dark veins running through its society. No family was safe, not from New York, not from Chicago, not even the quiet giants of Kansas City or Cleveland. The courtroom had become the new battleground, where silk suits and expensive lawyers clashed daily with government attorneys armed with indictments and righteous indignation. Nevada was caught in the crossfire. Like other states, it was infected by a cancer that spread silently, corrupting and endangering its social fabric. The lines between syndicates, once clearly drawn, blurred dangerously. A soldier from a New York crew could now be taking orders from Cleveland bosses. A smooth con artist, dispatched by Carlos Marcello's New Orleans operation, might just as easily have Chicago on speed dial. Allegiances shifted like shadows in the Nevada dusk, as the mob adapted to survive in this new, more hostile world. But Nevada's ordeal was far from finished. There was more beneath the surface, darker connections yet unexplored, secrets hidden beneath the flashing neon signs and the clink of slot machines. The real story was just beginning. The image of the Mafia, immortalized by silk suits, whispering voices in dimly lit backrooms, and elegant murders orchestrated with silent efficiency, was fading into memory. Nevada had witnessed the collapse of a glamorous myth once fueled by Sinatra's crooning voice and the allure of smoke-filled backrooms in Little Italy. Now, beneath the glittering veneer of casino neon, the real business of organized crime was stripped down to its raw, brutal basics: arson, extortion, pornography, prostitution, narcotics trafficking, loan sharking, burglary, and fencing stolen goods. These weren't high-class rackets, just street hustles for desperate men clinging to power by any means necessary. Yet even as the mob's grip loosened, it clutched fiercely to those lucrative operations that still lined their pockets with millions. Casino skimming and sophisticated credit fraud continued to flourish, fueled by relentless greed. Murders, once carried out discreetly in the shadows, began spilling onto Nevada's streets, bodies dumped casually in the desert, marking a shift from subtle terror to crude brutality. Economists calculated the mob's yearly take at somewhere between $168 billion, twice the gross revenue of General Motors in its most prosperous year. Enough wealth to dwarf entire nations like Austria, Greece, or Denmark. Much of that fortune was quietly reinvested into legitimate businesses, real estate ventures, and upscale properties across the country. But even more flowed back into the dark veins of narcotics, illegal gambling, and ruthless loan shark operations. The mob's grip on Nevada wasn't just tolerated, it was quietly facilitated by naive state regulators and politicians who were either indifferent or grossly underestimated the cunning of their shadowy adversaries. Like parasites drawn to easy prey, gangsters slipped effortlessly into Nevada's vulnerable gaming industry. Draped in respectability and armed with generous donations to popular charities, mobsters won over powerful state figures, making them complicit with every handshake, every photo opportunity. Politicians, eager for campaign contributions, were courted openly, while mobsters mocked their spinelessness behind closed doors. Former Riviera casino boss Richard Bryan captured the tragedy with a bitter eloquence. It is a sad commentary on Nevada that the mob buys respectability with charity and campaign donations, all while secretly laughing at how easily power can be purchased. As mob bosses publicly glad-handed governors and senators, their underlings wormed their way into labor unions and onto casino payrolls. Their presence caused paranoia even among Nevada's toughest cops, as Charlie Parsons, the sharp-eyed former head of the FBI's Las Vegas Organized Crime Unit, warned, "La Cosa Nostra has relied on gambling since Bugsy Siegel, and they're never letting go." Parsons knew the truth that politicians refused to admit legalizing gaming wouldn't drive out the mob. It would only give them a more comfortable foothold. Governor Bryan himself admitted quietly that organized crime is a cancer infecting every major community, and Nevada is no exception. Inside the glittering casino palaces of Nevada and New Jersey, mobsters were coddled like royalty. While security chased down small-time hustlers and card counters, organized crime figures walked boldly through the front doors, handed lavish suites, comps, and endless credit lines, debts the casinos knew they'd never collect. Documents acquired by the Gazette-Journal exposed a trail of corruption and complicity stretching across state lines, proving how deeply the rot ran. Occasionally, regulators made a show of strength by holding public suitability hearings to revoke gaming licenses, but these were largely ceremonial distraction from deeper corruption and incompetence within the state itself. It was little wonder that Nevada's own gaming regulators were fleeing their public roles for lucrative casino jobs. These men and women, responsible for overseeing billion-dollar empires, earned salaries of $24,000 per year, less than half of what they'd make working for the very casinos they were supposed to regulate. Even senior board members abandoned ship, eagerly recruited by the gambling industry with promises of fewer headaches and plush paychecks. Ironically, it was the casino industry itself, the supposed victim of mob infiltration, that wielded the most powerful political influence, holding lawmakers hostage with threats to pull campaign donations if they didn't toe the line. Secretive report cards circulated among casino executives rated politicians solely on their willingness to protect gaming interests, turning elected officials into obedient pawns. Nevada's vaunted Black Book, the so-called shield against mob infiltration, was more theater than enforcement. It listed fewer than 20 men, mostly aging bosses whose glory days had long passed. Patrick Healy, a seasoned Chicago Crime Commission veteran, dismissed the book as irrelevant. Half these guys are already dead. The real threats, the soldiers and captains whose quiet brutality sustained mob operations, were never listed. Instead, the book was nothing more than a relic, a Mafia wax museum. Nevada's curious tolerance for organized crime was a matter of tradition and myth as much as practicality. Local authorities struggled with determining just who qualified as a mobster and who was merely a hustler trying to skim a few bucks at the tables. The legendary Las Vegas attorney Oscar Goodman summed it up with cynicism born from decades defending notorious mobsters. Tourists come here half expecting to find a mafia don behind every casino door, while locals quietly accept the mob's presence as part of doing business. And business was booming. Casinos openly welcomed mob figures, offering them extravagant comps, limitless credit, and an atmosphere of indulgent comfort, while simultaneously harassing harmless gamblers suspected of counting cards. Even as some gaming officials boasted of cleaning house, their actions were little more than theater, just enough to maintain the illusion of control without ever truly confronting the mob's chokehold on the state. As gaming regulators abandoned their low-paying, high-pressure state jobs to join the casinos they once policed, the illusion of reform wore thin. Regulators who once patrolled the casino floors now patrolled the payrolls of the industry they were supposed to supervise. Yet beneath the surface, the mob laughed at Nevada's gullibility. Men like Charlie Parsons of the Federal Bureau of Investigation knew better. The mob has made money off gaming since Bugsy built the Flamingo, he warned, and they're not giving it up easily. He understood that as long as gambling remained Nevada's lifeblood, the mob would remain an integral, if hidden, part of its heart. For Nevada, like everywhere else in America, the line between organized crime and legitimate business had grown dangerously thin, blurred by complacency, corruption, and complicity. A storm was gathering, trials were looming nationwide, and the once unquestioned dominion of mob power was about to be challenged as never before. But, for now, Nevada remained a place where men in expensive suits could slip effortlessly from charity balls to casino counting rooms, untouchable and smiling, protected by the simple truth that in Nevada, as elsewhere, money spoke louder than justice, and power louder than the law. Forget those romantic notions. The pinstriped dons in smoky backrooms sipping Chianti, calmly plotting murder between bites of linguine and clam sauce. That image was history. Today's mobsters had abandoned sophistication for brutality, trading tailored suits and elegant meetings for sleazy hustles. Pornography, prostitution, loan sharking, arson, narcotics. Crimes once orchestrated with quiet finesse now spilled openly into Nevada's streets. Bodies dumped carelessly into desert sands, a crude sign of power's erosion. Yet amid this vulgarity, the Mafia still gripped tightly to their golden goose, casino skimming, fraud and credit rackets, schemes quietly yielding billions. The sums staggered imagination. FBI specialists now put organized crime's yearly take somewhere between $121 billion and $168 billion, nearly double General Motors' revenue at its peak, dwarfing entire nations like Greece and Austria. The mob meticulously reinvested these billions, buying into real estate developments to mask their criminality, while funneling the rest back into the endless loop of loan sharking, narcotics, and gambling rackets. The mob's foothold was no accident. Nevada's politicians, indifferent or blind, had allowed gangsters to stroll comfortably into casinos, drawn there like parasites to a vulnerable host. Cloaked in respectability, mobsters showered politicians with generous campaign contributions and charities with extravagant donations. Men whose faces belonged on FBI wanted posters, instead attended galas, smiling confidently in tuxedos, laughing privately at Nevada's naive complicity. Former Gaming Control Board member Jeff Silver bitterly noted, "It's tragic when men whose pictures belong on post office walls elsewhere get celebrated here." While politicians smiled for photos with mobsters, the criminals quietly slipped their soldiers into the unions and onto casino payrolls. Law enforcement grappled with paranoia, struggling to separate criminal conspiracies from harmless hustlers. Preston Hubbs, commander of Las Vegas Metro Police Intelligence, warned of the danger. "Not everyone lurking behind a pillar is Mafia, but we must remain vigilant about who's who." FBI agent Charlie Parsons knew the truth better than most. Having run the Bureau's Las Vegas Organized Crime Division, he saw clearly how the mob embedded itself into the fabric of Nevada. "Since Bugsy Siegel's Flamingo," he said bluntly, "La Cosa Nostra has controlled gambling here. They'll never let go willingly." Parsons also knew legalization wouldn't chase the mob away. "You can legalize gaming for revenue, but it won't rid you of gangsters. They adapt faster than regulators." Nevada's casino industry played its own dangerous game. Casinos eagerly hunted down small-time cheats, rousting card counters and petty scammers with ruthless zeal. Yet known mobsters received luxurious accommodations, complimentary suites, and seemingly unlimited credit lines. Documents obtained by the Gazette-Journal exposed casinos openly catering to Mafia figures, men who should have been barred from the gaming floors entirely. Regulatory hearings occasionally stripped licenses from blatant criminals. But this was theatre, an empty gesture aimed at soothing public outrage rather than truly rooting out corruption. Gaming regulators themselves, overwhelmed and underpaid, often defected to lucrative casino jobs. With annual salaries hovering around $24,000, less than half what casinos offered, the state's enforcement agents had little incentive to remain loyal watchdogs. Even control board members regularly abandoned their regulatory posts, enticed by plush casino payrolls and fewer headaches. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Casinos, supposedly the victims of mob corruption, ensured their regulators remained underfunded and ineffective. Nevada's Black Book, touted as the ultimate weapon against organized crime, listed fewer than 20 mobsters, most long past their prime or deceased. Patrick Healy of the Chicago Crime Commission dismissed it with bitter amusement. Half the guys in the book are dead. The real threats aren't listed. The men truly keeping organized crime alive, the soldiers, accountants and lawyers quietly running rackets, never appeared in these pages. This complacency, bordering on complicity, enraged powerful outsiders. Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren Burger openly threatened to boycott legal conferences in Las Vegas, condemning the city's cozy acceptance of criminality. Judge Irving Kaufman, head of the President's Commission on Organized Crime, also spoke harshly, attacking Nevada's attitude toward the mob. People think organized crime doesn't affect them, but it inflates construction costs, raises prices on goods, and quietly steals from everyone. Its influence is invisible, but toxic. In Nevada, however, the response was indignant defensiveness. Senator Paul Laxalt bristled at criticisms of his state. Organized crime is a national problem, not just Nevada's. Yet even he couldn't deny the sinister undercurrents. Oscar Goodman, the legendary Las Vegas lawyer, acknowledged the state's twisted relationship with the mob, cynically observing, "Visitors come here believing a mafia don is behind every casino door. Locals accept it as business as usual." Despite occasional attempts at reform, Nevada's system struggled badly. Bart Jacker, chairman of the Gaming Control Board, painted a bleak picture. Over 1,800 casino key employees awaited background checks, some unvetted for a decade. State agents were spread impossibly thin, patrolling entire regions solo, from Reno and Lake Tahoe to Carson City. Investigations into major scandals, like the Stardust skimming probe, drained resources, paralyzing effective oversight. Governor Richard Bryan admitted the control board was overwhelmed, unable to handle multiple serious investigations simultaneously. "We can barely manage one crisis at a time." A small glimmer of hope came recently when the Nevada legislature increased the control board's budget to nearly $25 million and funded 48 new staff positions. Yet even this modest reform faced fierce resistance from the powerful casino lobby, which swiftly crushed proposals for higher gaming fees to fund regulation. Governor Bryan quietly lamented their influence. The industry carries enormous political weight. Despite the new positions, Nevada's regulatory efforts were tragically underpowered. Audits, intended every 2 years now, took decades. The system itself was vulnerable, secret files easily stolen, meetings subject to infiltration. "This is no way to regulate an industry providing so much of our state's income," one frustrated agent complained. But organized crime still thrived, not just because of weak regulation, but because many ordinary Nevadans willingly turned a blind eye. Preston Hubbs called it plainly, "When citizens buy stolen jewelry or appliances, rent property to criminals, or tolerate prostitution ads, they're feeding the mob's growth. Politicians accepting shady donations, brokers looking away. Every small act of indifference becomes a vote of approval for organized crime." For Nevada, confronting the mob was no longer a matter of occasional vigilance or public displays of outrage. It demanded brutal honesty, resources, and genuine political courage, qualities desperately lacking. As long as the casino industry wielded influence over lawmakers, the mob would remain firmly entrenched. And while agents, judges, and police commanders warned passionately of the threat, Nevada's powerful gambling interests dismissed their pleas as exaggerations. Ed McDonald, chief of Brooklyn's organized crime strike force, offered a final, chilling truth. Organized crime survives wherever the money is. If Nevada pushes back, they'll just move elsewhere. But why leave when they've already won? The stage was set for a prolonged battle between corruption and reform. Nevada's regulators, understaffed and demoralized, faced an industry whose political grip strangled real progress. The Mafia, resilient as ever, confidently continued business as usual, certain no one had the guts or the power to truly uproot them. For now, Nevada lived uneasily between corruption and legitimacy, between glamour and grit, waiting, watching, and wondering how long this precarious balance could possibly last. Nevada's gaming regulators were overwhelmed and under siege. Applications piled up by the thousands, leaving casino employees working for a decade without proper vetting, their backgrounds hidden beneath mountains of bureaucratic red tape. Agents stretched thin, sometimes just one tasked with policing dozens of casinos sprawled across Reno, Carson City, Lake Tahoe, and beyond. Criminals exploited the chaos, slipping quietly from one casino to the next, refiling paperwork and resetting the clock on background checks, gaming the system itself. Industry giants and hesitant legislators fought fiercely against any meaningful reform. Paul Bible, chairman of the Nevada Gaming Commission, warned openly, "We can't regulate billion-dollar casinos with part-time oversight. It's absurd." He urged the legislature to restructure, to face the bitter reality that Nevada's regulatory backbone part-time commission overseeing an exploding industry had become dangerously outdated. Governor Bryan listened cautiously, but hesitated to commit, wary of rocking the profitable casino boat. Bart Jacker, chairman of Nevada's Gaming Control Board, pleaded for resources to drag Nevada into the modern age, requesting almost $700,000 to install security systems, fire alarms, and advanced surveillance countermeasures in offices statewide. It was a desperate attempt to protect secret files from being stolen and private meetings from being infiltrated by the very criminals the board sought to control. Even computers were scarce, leaving agents sifting through paperwork by hand, hopelessly outdated and understaffed. With casinos booming, Jacker argued, the state's part-time gaming commission was inadequate. "The industry has exploded," Bible agreed. "We must transition to full-time oversight." Meanwhile, desperation led gaming regulators to rush licenses through with minimal oversight, as at the Aladdin Casino, where Wayne Webber's replacement was hastily approved, just to avoid economic disruption. Such shortcuts underscored the urgency of reform. The mob noticed, taking advantage of it whenever vigilance lapsed. Jacker secured funds to combat a new wave of sophisticated casino cheats flooding Nevada's gambling halls, driving cheating up 25% in just 1 year. Yet despite modest staffing increases, rural regions remained woefully understaffed, a single exhausted agent often tasked with covering vast territories overnight. Nevada's famed Black Book, officially known as the List of Excluded Persons, was the state's symbolic shield against organized crime, but its effectiveness was increasingly questioned. Entry into this infamous roster came with severe restrictions. Mobster Tony Spilotro learned firsthand that inclusion barred even travel through properties owned by casinos, such as the Amtrak Desert Wind route at Union Plaza Casino. Casinos caught allowing these blacklisted gangsters onto their premises faced immediate license revocation. Yet the book held fewer than 20 names, mostly aging or deceased mob legends, hardly representative of the threat lurking beneath the surface. When Joe Agosto, Kansas City's notorious skim artist, passed away, his name left the book quietly, along with his boss, Nick Civella, whose death similarly cleared his entry. Nevada authorities, struggling with inadequate staffing and chronic underfunding, urgently warned lawmakers of surging casino fraud. Jacker reported a 25% spike in casino cheating within a single year, requesting 19 additional agents to fight the new wave of sophisticated con artists who saw Nevada's casinos as easy prey. Yet even amid these struggles, Nevada regulators resisted bringing women onto the Gaming Commission. Jacker admitted candidly, "One does not join the Gaming Commission, one is recruited," highlighting the exclusivity of power and privilege. From frustrated agents in gaming control to cautious political figures, everyone knew the system had cracked. Even the United States Supreme Court recognized the severity when the mob's reach touched transportation, forbidding Spilotro from boarding Amtrak trains that crossed casino territory. Nevada's underworld was deeply entrenched, and state oversight hopelessly strained. Reform was long overdue, and Jacka and Bible both recognized the moment's urgency. But real change still lay tangled in political reluctance, powerful gaming interests, and decades of deep-rooted corruption. The lines between legitimacy and crime had blurred beyond recognition. Nevada faced a crossroads: act decisively or remain forever compromised. The question was whether the Silver State possessed the will or courage to challenge the power of the underworld entrenched within its heart. Nevada's Black Book was losing its teeth. Patrick Healy of the Chicago Crime Commission didn't mince words. Half these guys are dead or locked away forever. How hard is it keeping near-dead mobsters from gambling tables? Originally created in 1960, the list was Nevada's Badge of Honor, a roll call of criminals barred from setting foot in any casino, men like Marshall Caifano from the Chicago outfit, aging Kansas City boss Carl Corky Civella, and notorious enforcer Anthony Spilotro. Yet, despite its fearsome reputation, the Black Book had become a hollow gesture, more PR stunt than crime-fighting tool. Even Tony Spilotro, once banned from casinos, found his way around its edges, until Nevada regulators barred him from boarding Amtrak's Desert Wind train because it crossed casino property. It was punishment by geography. Casino operators paid dearly if caught hosting these banned men. Frank Sinatra famously learned this at his Cal Neva Lodge, fined heavily for allowing Chicago kingpin Sam Giancana to visit. The Dunes Hotel likewise faced penalties when Kansas City's Nick Civella slipped inside under an alias. The book was tough, but critics insisted it targeted legends and ghosts, not current threats. Oscar Goodman, the sharp-talking Vegas lawyer who defended Spilotro, called the book a cheap trick, branding individuals guilty without trial. Recently, Goodman tried preemptively blocking regulators from adding Joseph Cusumano, a Spilotro associate linked to Las Vegas film producers Ed and Fred Dumani, landlords of the El Morocco Casino. But Judge Lloyd George tossed Goodman's suit. Cusumano wasn't yet listed, so legally he had no grievance. Goodman warned bitterly that it was merely a matter of time. Paul Bible, chairman of the Gaming Commission, still believed in the book's symbolic value. It lets casino operators kick undesirables out without lawsuits, Bible said. Nevada Attorney General Brian McKay agreed. It sends a clear message that organized crime isn't welcome here. But Bible hesitated at expanding it, knowing hearings took months and devoured resources. Every new name trigger hearings, he warned, tying regulators up for half a year. Bart Jacka, Nevada's top gaming regulator, admitted the Black Book was flawed and underused. He proposed expanding it into 2 sections, one for old-school mob legends, another for cheats like slot hustlers. It's going to take serious time, Jacka said. Yet even he conceded Nevada's enforcement had bigger problems: understaffing, low pay, and a bureaucratic mess crippling the Gaming Control Board. Gaming license backlogs topped 2,000, leaving casinos filled with unchecked workers, their backgrounds unexamined for years. Agents were so overwhelmed that investigations often got rushed through, like at the Aladdin Casino, where a new operator was hastily licensed just to avoid economic chaos after Wayne Webb's expulsion. Jacka desperately sought funds, $700,000 for computers, fire alarms, surveillance tools, to modernize his overwhelmed agency. Casino cheating jumped 25% in a single year. Jacka requested 19 new enforcement agents, trying to stem the tide of sophisticated criminality. Yet political and industry resistance remained fierce. Powerful casino executives pressured lawmakers, killing initiatives for increased gaming fees or tighter oversight. Nevada regulators remained stretched impossibly thin, one exhausted agent often overseeing huge territories alone. The system itself was strained beyond breaking. Gaming Commission Chairman Paul Bible argued passionately for full-time oversight. "This part-time setup is hopelessly outdated," he insisted, calling for reforms before scandals overwhelmed the industry. Governor Bryan listened carefully, cautious about shaking Nevada's lucrative casino foundations, wary of unsettling powerful allies. In this high-stakes game, Nevada stood trapped between image and reality, between genuine reform and convenient illusion. The Black Book, once Nevada's proud symbol of control, now seemed merely a relic, fading in relevance as criminals adapted faster than regulators. The struggle over Nevada's gaming industry was far from over, a battle against corruption, complacency, and a system too stubborn to truly change. It began in the 30s, when Nevada rolled the dice, legalizing gambling and setting the stage for organized crime's golden age. Prohibition ended, freeing men like Al Capone's successor Frank Nitti to seek new fortunes. Harold's Club opened, a beacon amid Reno's neon wilderness. While in Vegas, Thomas Hull built El Rancho, ushering in glamour and mobsters alike. In 1943, Bugsy Siegel arrived, sent west by Luciano, Costello, and Lansky, managing the mob's lucrative wire service. When Siegel opened the Flamingo in '46, his reckless extravagance sparked fury among his backers. A year later, he was dead, murdered in Los Angeles. Lansky swiftly took over, overseeing Nevada's booming casino revenues, $32 million by 1947. The mob tightened its grip in the 50s. Moe Dalitz and his Cleveland syndicate took control of the Desert Inn, using Teamster money supplied by Jimmy Hoffa's associate, Red Dorfman. Senator Estes Kefauver exposed the underworld's infiltration, but Las Vegas was already too lucrative to stop. The Riviera, Dunes, and Tropicana rose overnight, financed by shadowy men like Raymond Patriarca. Nevada responded with the Gaming Control Board, partly symbolic, partly practical, but casinos remained mob playgrounds. In 1957, police stumbled upon the infamous Appalachian meeting, revealing the mob's reach. Frank Sinatra's dealings with Chicago boss Sam Giancana embarrassed Nevada officials, who forced Sinatra to relinquish his gaming license. The Black Book, listing undesirable criminals banned from casinos, was strictly enforced by '63. By the '70s, Anthony Spilotro emerged as the face of Las Vegas violence, while Alan Glick's Argent casinos masked the Midwest mob's interests. Spilotro, alongside Joe Lombardo and Dorfman, beat embezzlement charges after a key witness was killed. Still, the underworld thrived, unafraid and undefeated. Then came the Stardust scandal in the '80s. Casinos openly skimmed, regulatory controls openly mocked. Gaming officials finally flexed muscle, raiding the Stardust, seizing evidence of brazen theft. Mob lawyer Oscar Goodman battled the regulators, his client Joseph Cusumano narrowly avoiding the Black Book, Nevada's notorious banned list, thanks to legal maneuvers. Even the fearsome Anthony Spilotro, barred from casinos, faced surreal restrictions, prevented from riding trains crossing casino property. Yet the Black Book itself, Nevada's proudest weapon, was weakening. "Most names listed are dead or locked away," scoffed Patrick Healy of the Chicago Crime Commission. Lawyer Oscar Goodman dismissed it as mere spectacle. "The state convicts people without a trial." Regulators admitted privately they lacked manpower to fight the rising wave of cheats and criminals. Chairman Bart Jacker pleaded desperately for staff, security upgrades, and computers. With a 2,000 application backlog, many casino workers operated without scrutiny for years. Nevada's politicians hesitated, paralyzed by the casino industry's clout. Efforts to expand funding met fierce resistance. Each plea for reform vanished quietly. Regulators like Paul Bible and Bart Jacker knew Nevada's system had fractured under pressure. Part-time regulators overseeing $1 billion industry? Bible asked bitterly. Impossible. The Gaming Control Board tried modernizing, desperate for upgraded computers and surveillance tools, their agents hopelessly outnumbered and outdated. With cheating rising 25% in a single year, Jacka pleaded for new agents to combat increasingly sophisticated criminals. Yet enforcement lagged hopelessly behind, overwhelmed agents barely able to patrol vast territories. The system itself, once Nevada's safeguard, was now cracked and vulnerable. Nevada stood at a crossroads: confront corruption head-on or quietly submit. Casino owners fought every reform. Politicians looked away. And still, beneath the glamour, organized crime thrived, confidently skimming Nevada's billions, untouched and untouchable. The underworld waited patiently, knowing the state had neither the will nor the power to remove them.